There comes a moment, not written on any calendar, not proclaimed by any man, when the fire tests what is real, when the shaking comes, when the lights go out, when the noise of the world fades. What remains? 99% would have fallen. They would have bowed to the pressure, bent to the fear, sold the truth for comfort. They would have traded purpose for pleasure, destiny for distraction. But you didn't. So what are you? Are you some anomaly of flesh and will? No, you are a remnant. You are the proof that heaven still writes stories in the dust of the earth. When the storms came, you didn't fall, not because you were unbreakable, but because you were anchored. Because someone greater than you refused to let you go. The world said, conform. You said, convict me if you must, but I will not bow. The world said, be silent. You said, then my silence will roar louder than your lies. You see, strength is not the absence of struggle. It's the refusal to surrender when the struggle arrives. And now the heavens watch, not the famous, not the powerful, but the few who still stand. Because in every generation, the Almighty hides His greatest warriors in ordinary people who simply won't quit. You didn't fall because you were chosen to stand, to remind a falling world that truth still breathes, that light still burns, that even in the ruins there are those who rise. So when they ask, what are you? Tell them I am the 1% that refused to bow. I am the voice that refused to be silenced. I am the remnant that remembers the fire. I am still standing. When everything is calm, anyone can appear strong. It is easy to look faithful when there is no fire, to speak of courage when there is no fear, to talk about purpose when the path is smooth. But the truth of who you are is not revealed in the calm. It is revealed in the storm. The test comes not to destroy you, but to uncover what was hidden within you all along. It strips away the false, the superficial, the comfortable, until only what is real remains. That is why the moments of shaking are sacred. They do not come to shame you. They come to show you who you are and who you are not. When the pressure rises, most people break. 99 out of 100 will compromise what they once swore they'd never surrender. They fall not because they are evil, but because they were never anchored deeply enough. Their roots were shallow. Their convictions were built on convenience, not commitment. They said the right words when it was easy, but the test proved what was true. The shaking is the great revealer. It divides appearance from authenticity, imitation from identity, and talk from truth. You see, the fire never lies. When it comes, it consumes the temporary but refines the eternal. It exposes whether your faith was built on sand or stone. And though the fire burns, for the one who endures, it also purifies. It burns away fear, pride, and doubt, leaving behind something unbreakable. That is why the test is not your enemy. It is your refiner. It does not come to end you. It comes to establish you. The test reveals who can still stand when the world bows. It separates those who merely believe from those who truly belong. In that moment, when everything around you crumbles, something within you is asked the question, will you fall like the rest? Or will you stand? And if you stand, if after the tears, the pain, the betrayal, you still rise, then you have discovered what few ever do, that your strength was never your own. You were held by something greater, sustained by a power that cannot be shaken. When you refuse to fall, when you choose to hold your ground, you become more than a survivor. You become a witness. You prove that truth can still stand in a world of compromise. You prove that faith is stronger than fear. The test reveals that there is still light in the darkness, still courage among the trembling, still hearts that will not yield to corruption. You may be wounded, but you are not finished. You may be scarred, but you are not defeated. The test shows that your scars are not symbols of loss, but of victory. Proof that you walked through the fire and did not burn. And perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all, that your endurance is not proof of your strength, but of your foundation. You stood because you were rooted in something eternal. You held on because something divine held on to you. You passed through the storm and discovered that the storm could not erase what heaven had written within you. So when the test comes again, and it will, remember what it revealed. Remember that you were made to withstand it. For the test does not come to the weak, but to the chosen. It is heaven's way of asking, will you stand when others fall? And if you do, then the world will know the test revealed the truth, and the truth stood tall. In every generation, there comes a moment when the majority bows. The crowd always chooses the easier path, the wide road, the louder voice, the safer compromise. They go with the flow because it feels comfortable, because standing alone feels unbearable. But history is never written by the crowd. It is written by the few who refuse to bend, the ones who hear a higher call when everyone else is listening to the noise of the world. The remnant, that small, unshakable group, becomes the line that stands between darkness and light, between collapse and awakening. The remnant has always been small, in every story, in every age, when truth seems lost and faith forgotten. There remains a handful who refuse to bow. When the multitude bowed before idols, a few still stood upright. When the world embraced lies, a few still spoke the truth. They weren't the strongest, they weren't the most gifted, but they carried something the world could not understand. Conviction. The remnant doesn't stand because it's easy. They stand because they can't do otherwise. The fire inside them burns too fiercely to let them blend in. When the 99 fall, the one who remains becomes a living contradiction. Proof that there is still something incorruptible on the earth. The remnant shows that faith can survive in a faithless age, that righteousness can still breathe in a polluted world. They are the living echo of what humanity was meant to be before it was corrupted by fear and compromise. Their endurance becomes a testimony to the unseen, that even when the world forgets truth, truth never forgets the world. But the remnant does not stand without cost. They walk lonely paths. They are misunderstood, mocked, and sometimes hated. The crowd calls them strange because they do not dance to the rhythm of the times. The world labels them stubborn because they will not conform. Yet, what the world calls stubbornness, heaven calls faithfulness. What the world sees as isolation, heaven sees as consecration. The remnant does not exist for the approval of man, but for the purpose of God. There is a mystery in how the remnant endures. They are pressed but not crushed, struck down but not destroyed. Something invisible sustains them. A strength that doesn't come from flesh or pride, but from the Spirit that whispers, "Stand." The world may strip them of comfort, power, or applause, but it cannot strip them of their calling. They know that the approval of the multitude fades, but the truth endures forever. So they stand not because it's popular, but because it's right. And while the world sees them as few, heaven sees them as mighty. A single candle defies the entire darkness of a room. A single remnant can shift the destiny of a generation. The few who stand become the seeds of renewal. They are the reason hope never dies. They are the bridge between what was lost and what can still be redeemed. They prove that faith doesn't need numbers to have power. It only needs authenticity. You may look around and think you are alone, but the remnant always feels outnumbered. That's how they know who they are. Their strength lies not in how many stand with them, but in who stands within them. So even when the world kneels before comfort, even when truth is mocked and righteousness is rare, the remnant endures. They do not chase the approval of men. They carry the fire of eternity in fragile hearts. When all is shaken, it is the remnant that remains. They are the proof that heaven still has witnesses on the earth. The few who stand keep the light burning until the dawn returns. And though the world may forget their names, history and eternity will remember that when 99 fell, they did not. To stand against the tide is to live against the current of the world. It is to look at the flood of compromise and decide you will not be swept away. The tide is powerful. It pulls with force, with persuasion, with fear, with reward. It whispers, everyone is doing it. Everyone believes this. Everyone bows now. And that is how the many fall, not through open rebellion, but through quiet surrender. Yet, every generation needs a few who refuse to bow, who plant their feet in truth, even when the ground beneath them trembles. The test of real strength is not found in the absence of opposition, but in the presence of it. Strength means nothing when it is never challenged. Anyone can seem faithful when their faith is never questioned. Anyone can appear bold when courage is never required. But when the tide rises, when the voices of the world shout louder than conviction, that is when the measure of a soul is taken. To stand in that moment, when all else bows, is to reveal a strength, not born of pride, but of purpose. Standing against the tide is never easy. It costs you the comfort of belonging. It may cost you, friends, status, or the acceptance of those who once walked beside you. But the one who stands learns something the crowd never will. That peace does not come from blending in. It comes from being true to what is right. To stand when others fall is to choose integrity over convenience, destiny over approval, eternity over the moment. The world rewards conformity, but heaven crowns endurance. There is a quiet beauty in defiance when it is born of truth. To stand firm is not arrogance. It is allegiance. It is a declaration that you will not trade what is eternal for what is temporary. You are not moved by opinion polls or social winds because your roots are deeper than public favor. The same tide that sweeps away the unstable cannot move the one whose foundation is anchored in conviction. The world says, "Be like us," but your soul whispers, "I was not made for this world." Those who stand are not perfect. They are simply anchored. They stumble, they feel fear, they question their strength, but they do not yield. Each wave that crashes against them only proves how deeply they are rooted. The very resistance that tries to break them becomes the reason they grow stronger. Their resolve becomes a lighthouse for others lost in the storm, a silent reminder that it is possible to stand even when the world collapses. The tide always returns, stronger each time. The pressures of culture, the demands of society, the seduction of comfort, they never stop pulling. But every generation that stands creates a path for the next one to follow. Every act of courage becomes a seed that inspires another soul to stand. The tide cannot drown a truth that has already taken root in the heart of the steadfast. So when you stand, you are not just standing for yourself. You stand for those who come after you. You stand for those watching quietly, wondering if faith is still possible in a world like this. You become a living testimony that light still burns, that truth still matters, that righteousness still has a voice. Standing against the tide is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is obedience to a higher truth. It is saying, though the world moves, I will not. And when the flood has passed, when the noise has faded, when the tide has receded, and the dust has settled, it will be the ones who stood weary, scarred, but unbroken, who will still remain. Because the world changes with those who refuse to be changed by the world. There is a strength that flesh cannot produce, and a peace that reason cannot explain. It is the strength that comes from being anchored, not in the shifting sands of emotion or circumstance, but in something eternal. When the storms come, when the world trembles, when every support you thought would hold begins to crumble, what keeps you standing is not your will but your foundation. You stand because you are anchored in something, or rather, in someone greater than yourself. Many people think they are strong until life proves otherwise. They believe their confidence, their plans, their intellect will sustain them. But when loss hits, when betrayal comes, when the ground shakes, human strength fades quickly. The proud collapse. The self-reliant lose their footing. The confident tremble. Yet there are few who endure, not because they are stronger, but because they are rooted deeper. Their roots are hidden beneath the surface, unseen by others, but unshakable in the storm. An anchor is not glamorous. It is not visible once it is doing its work, but its unseen presence is what keeps the ship from drifting into ruin. In the same way, the one who is anchored in truth may appear ordinary, but within them lies a quiet, immovable force. When the winds of change howl and the tides of fear rise, they do not drift. They might bend, but they do not break. They might cry, but they do not collapse. Their hope is fixed, and their heart is held by something unmovable. To be anchored in something greater means your identity, your peace, and your worth not defined by the noise around you. The opinions of others may shift. The world's values may change daily, but your soul remains steady because it is tied to what does not change. You don't lose yourself when seasons change, because your roots are not in seasons. They're in eternity. You are not defined by success or failure, praise or rejection, because what holds you is beyond the reach of circumstance. When the storms of life test you, the anchor becomes your lifeline. It reminds you that falling is not your fate. The winds may tear at you, but you remain. The waters may rise, but you endure. The anchor does not remove the storm. It simply refuses to let the storm take you. Many will look at you and wonder how you are still standing. They will not see the anchor, but you will know it's there. You'll know it's what held you when your strength was gone. What whispered peace into your chaos? What gave you the courage to breathe again? The truth is, being anchored does not make life easy. It makes it possible. It gives you stability when everything else becomes unstable. It gives you clarity when confusion surrounds you. It gives you hope when despair tries to drown you. The anchor reminds you that your story is not written by the storm, but by the one who holds the storm in his hands. In every generation, there are those who appear to stand tall while their foundation is shallow. And there are those who seem small, but are deeply rooted in the eternal. The difference is revealed when the shaking comes. When everything else falls away, the anchored remain, not because they are extraordinary, but because what holds them is. So when the winds rise, do not fear. When the world shifts, do not lose heart. Remember what anchors you. Remember who anchors you. Your peace does not come from the absence of storms, but from the certainty that your anchor will hold. You stand not because you are unshakable, but because you are anchored in the one who cannot be moved. And when all is said and done, when the storm has passed and the waters have calmed, it will be clear to everyone that you stood not by your strength, but by your anchor. Every generation is faced with a choice, a moment when the voices of the world grow louder than truth, when compromise feels easier than conviction, and when standing for what is right seems almost impossible. It is in that moment that the call comes. Will you bow to the culture, or will you stand for truth? Most will choose the path of least resistance. They will blend in, go along, and silence themselves to keep the peace. But there are always a few who refuse. They hear a different call, one that comes not from the world but from eternity, and they cannot stay silent. To resist is not rebellion, it is obedience to a higher standard. The call to resistance is not about anger or pride, it is about faithfulness. It is the quiet, steady decision to remain true when everything around you demands surrender. The world says, change your convictions, adapt to the times, let go of what is old. But truth does not age, and righteousness does not expire. Those who stand in resistance are not clinging to the past. They are holding on to the eternal. Resistance begins in the heart long before it appears in action. It is born in the secret place, in the soul that decides, I will not bow. It is forged in prayer, in tears, in silence, in the unseen choices no one celebrates. Every act of resistance begins as a whisper, no, I will not yield. And that whisper grows into a roar when the moment demands it. The world may call it stubbornness, but heaven calls it faith. To resist the culture of compromise is costly. It may mean walking alone, being misunderstood, or losing what others think is important. But every cost paid in truth becomes an investment in eternity. The reward of resistance is not applause but peace. The deep peace that comes from knowing you did not betray your soul. The ones who resist may not be celebrated now, but they are the reason the flame of truth still burns in the darkness. Every generation has its idols, not golden statues, but ideas, movements, and desires that demand allegiance. They promise progress, comfort, and acceptance, but they ask for your soul in return. The world does not always persecute with violence. Sometimes it seduces with applause. And that is why resistance is more vital than ever, because the enemy no longer demands you bow in fear, but tempts you to bow in pleasure. To resist in such a world requires more than courage. It requires clarity, the ability to see through the illusion and recognize what is false, no matter how beautifully it is dressed. Those who resist become living reminders that truth still exists. Their lives speak louder than sermons, louder than slogans, louder than fear. They remind the world that conscience is not dead, that conviction still has a voice, and that righteousness is still possible. Their resistance becomes a light in a generation that has forgotten what light looks like. And sometimes their very existence offends those who have conformed, because their faith exposes the emptiness of compromise. The call to resistance is not a one-time decision. It is a daily choice. Each day, the world will whisper new lies, craft new idols, and offer new temptations. And each day, the remnant must decide again, I will not bow. This is how kingdoms fall and how truth survives. Resistance is the heartbeat of the faithful, the rhythm of those who refuse to let darkness define them. So when you feel the pressure to conform, remember this: standing alone is not failure, it is faith. Refusing to bow is not pride, it is purpose. Resistance is not rebellion against man. It is loyalty to God. You were not created to blend in, but to stand out. Not to echo the world, but to challenge it. And when the final chapter is written, it will not be the names of those who bowed that are remembered, but the names of those who resisted, those who stood when the world knelt, and by doing so, kept truth alive. There comes a point when endurance is no longer just survival. It becomes identity. To endure when others give up, to remain standing when everything inside you screams to fall, is to discover who you truly are. You are not defined by the times you stumbled or the moments you wept. You are defined by the fact that you rose again. When you stand after the storm after the loss, after the disappointment, you are no longer the same person you were before. You have been changed, refined, made into something unbreakable. You have become the unbroken, the remnant that refuses to die out. Those who endure are not made of something different. They are held by something different. They have seen pain, but they have also seen purpose. They have walked through fire and found meaning in the ashes. They have faced darkness, yet somehow still carry light. They know that endurance is not a gift, it is a choice, a daily decision to rise again, to take one more step, to keep believing when faith feels small. And with every step, their endurance becomes a silent declaration. I am still here. I am still standing. To endure is to bear the weight of time without letting it crush you. It is to face the silence of unanswered prayers and still whisper, I trust. It is to live in a world that rewards speed and noise and yet walk steadily, slowly, faithfully. The unbroken are not loud. They are steady. Their strength is not found in shouting, but in standing, not in fighting every battle, but in refusing to surrender. They have scars, yes, but their scars are not signs of defeat. They are medals of survival, proof that the fire did not consume them. Identity is often shaped by what we overcome. The world calls endurance weakness, a refusal to let go, an inability to move on. But in truth, endurance is the highest form of strength. It is not about denying pain. It is about refusing to let pain define you. It is about standing in the ruins and saying, this is not where my story ends. The unbroken know that endurance is sacred. It is the bridge between who you were and who you were meant to become. Endurance transforms you. It deepens your compassion, sharpens your vision, and strengthens your faith. It teaches you to listen for whispers when the shouts fade away. It teaches you to find purpose in small steps and beauty in broken things. And through it all, you begin to understand that being unbroken doesn't mean you were never wounded. It means the wounds didn't win. You may walk with a limp, but you still walk. You may speak with a tremble, but you still speak. The fire that was meant to destroy you has now become the fire that defines you. The unbroken carry something rare, a quiet authority, a peace that others cannot explain. They do not need to prove themselves because their survival speaks louder than words. Their very existence testifies that endurance is not in vain. They remind the world that strength is not measured by how loud you roar, but by how long you stand when the world has gone silent. So when people look at you and ask, what are you? Tell them you are the proof that grace still works. Tell them you are the echo of perseverance, the evidence that light still lives in the human heart. Tell them you are the remnant, the unbroken, the one who stood when 99 fell. Because you are more than a survivor, you are a witness that no matter how fierce the storm, no matter how deep the wound, the spirit that is anchored in truth cannot be destroyed. You are still standing, and that alone is your testimony to the world.